Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. I wanted to say that if you're struggling right now, remember that brighter days are gonna come, and whatever hard time you have will pass. I'm living proof of this because I've experienced this many times, and everything always works out in the end. So just remember that. I hope you enjoy these stories, and make sure you check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac and the podcast in the description below. Take care. This happened a couple of years ago while I was still in high school and live feed cameras were becoming a thing. Must have been 2014. I used to go running in the woods right by my house in upstate Washington. The trail began very steep, almost like a hike, and then became steadily more flat as it went along, and that's where I began my runs. I would run every day through the same area in the morning, around dawn, and afternoon before and after school. I was running before school one morning, and I can see a man with a plain tan hat very close to me, sitting on the bench at the beginning of the trail. I hate detailing with people because I was an awkward teenager, so I look at the ground and walk by. As I get closer, I can tell he's staring at me. I walk past him as I was going up the trail, and I slightly turned around and saw he stood up, walking the trail behind me. Keep in mind, the sun is barely coming up, so it's still mostly dark. Then I ran. Now this isn't my normal jog. I was sprinting. Nobody's ever on this trail in the morning. I've never come across this guy before, and for some reason, it creeps me out. I knew I could go through the forest basically to my backyard, so I wasn't worried, but definitely afraid he's going to attack me or something. As I go further down the trail, I lose him, so I slowed down because frankly, I'm out of breath. Then I heard a man's voice say loudly, as if he was screaming, "Well, aren't you going to introduce yourself?" That's when I lost it. I called my mum and told her that I thought somebody's following me on the trail. I told her a brief version of what happened, and she told me that she could meet me with the car at the head of the trail, just in case a man's following me. She didn't want him to know where we lived. I went down a side trail that shortcuts to the head of the trail, and was looking out for the man the entire time. I got to my mum's car and started sobbing and crying. I don't really remember why. I just remembered being so scared that I was about to be kidnapped. The rest of my day went normally. I went to school and all my classes like normal, forgetting what happened. The rest of the week was pretty normal until Friday. Right on my way home from school, I stopped at the grocery store, and on my way out, I swore I saw the man. I thought I was imagining it, so walked to my car and drove home. I didn't do much on the weekends. I stayed home and chilled with my family, smoked with my friends, and that was about it. I was up late with my friend Josh watching bad movie after bad movie. Then we start hearing something around 3 a.m. I had some annoying middle school kids in my neighborhood who are always doing pranks, so we ignore it. The knocking then transferred from the back room we're in to the windows by the front door. In the morning, I told my parents and my dad checks the ring camera. It was a man. There were multitudes of clips of him. First a couple of him walking past the camera as though he's going back and forth in front of the house to see if he can get in. Then a couple of clips of him stepping back and looking up as if he's trying to get into the upstairs windows from afar. These clips ended around 1:45 in the morning. Then around 3:05 he shows up again tapping on the windows, and we could see him in the camera. At one point, he stood back and realised the cameras are there and just stares into it. He did this a few times, and then at one point gets really close to the camera and whispers, "How was your run?" Smiles and turns away. My dad called the police and had them come to the house. He showed them the camera footage, but since we don't have cameras in our house or at the back, we can't even prove that he's freaking trespassing. I never saw him again. When the police checked back in the following month, they said they were sure that he saw the camera and got scared and that I shouldn't worry about anything. It was just horrifying though. I don't know what he was planning on doing, but the fact I was being stalked is what terrifies me. I'm a guy, so something like this has never happened to me since, or before this. When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time living with my grandparents. I like living with my mum and dad, but I can never resist going round there. They always made the best food for me. They had a really cool bedroom that I could hang out in, and I just really liked the vibe. There's also a really nice wooded area next to where I live. I love going there on my own. I really enjoyed it. I would even go out there at night sometimes with a flashlight. Of course I was always cautious and back by about 10 before nightfall, but I didn't always keep up the end of the promise to my grandparents, and one day that affected me in a really weird way. So it was one summer's evening. I was out later than normal because it stays dark for a lot longer. As I'm outside, I have a strange feeling that I'm being watched. Now I've only been out for a few hours, but I just can't shake the feeling. I'm not really doing too much, just having a venture through the wooded area. It suddenly hits me that there's a strange humming sound coming from near where I am. Now this makes me completely forget about the feeling of being watched. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It almost sounds metallic, but like it's biological at the same time. It's really hard to describe and I can't even replicate it. This makes me stop dead in my tracks. For some reason I look up towards the sky, and I notice stars everywhere. I was so caught up in my paranoia that I didn't even take a second to appreciate the beauty of this. As I'm doing so, I realise that my watch light has come on. It gives off a green glow in the dark. But then I look down, I don't even have my watch on. I wonder if there's something on my arm because it's glowing green. My heart then drops as I realise that all around me is glowing green. Now the next few seconds are a blur, but I look up and all I can see is a very bright light directly above me. It's blinding me, and a strange warm sensation. I cover my eyes and the next thing I know, I'm being woken up by emergency services, with my grandpa looking very scared over me. I spent the next few weeks in hospital, and apparently I'd been out in those woods alone for 3 days. Nobody was able to find me, and a massive search party went out to look for me. Strangely, there were lots of burnt plants and trees in the area where they found me. They thought I got kidnapped, and nobody could believe what I was telling them that happened. The only verification was that other people in the area also reported seeing strange lights in the sky that night. I'll probably never have an explanation for what happened. I mean, it could have just been my imagination, but it seemed too real. And it's crazy that other people reported seeing lights in the area where they found me, and that parts of the landscape were burnt around me, yet I was fine. This event happened about 3 years ago during mid-July. I live in Montana, outside of a rural community with a population of about 2,000. During this time, I live in a small one-floor ranch, home by myself. My nearest neighbours lived 1 mile away and was a farmer. I never had many strange encounters leading up to this one, but the woods by my house always had an ominous feel to it. Soon after moving in, I realised why the previous owners left quickly. I start hearing strange noises in the woods. They weren't just any noises. It sounded like blood-curdling screams and growls. After some research, I learned that even something like a bobcat can't really make these unnatural noises, but I don't think much of it. It never felt right though. It's hard to explain, but I never felt like this before, and it was just something about the woods around my house that made me feel uncomfortable, like I'm being watched. The first experience I couldn't explain happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. There was a thunderstorm, and the thunder was loud enough to keep me awake. I never did feel comfortable sleeping in storms alone. The lightning was crazy and would light up the whole surrounding area for a fraction of a second. I was laying on the couch and go up to get a glass of water at the sink. It's about 2 AM if I recall correctly. Above it, there's a small window that gives a view of my yard leading up to the tree line. When the next flash of lightning hits, I see it. Admittedly, it wasn't a long view, but enough for me to see whatever this thing is. It was near the tree line, just a few steps into my yard. At first, I thought it was a bear. It's not a bear. It was standing on 2 legs, with its face pointed towards a house. Its legs are like that of a dog's. I can really clearly make out the hocks. It was hard to tell the colour of the fur because of the darkness. Its upper body is massive, with a wide torso, and arms that can almost reach the ground from standing. The strangest thing is how the upper body seemed to dwarf the lower body. After standing there, frozen in shock, I waited for the next lightning strike, but when it happened, it's not there. It happened so quickly and was soon gone. After it, I bought a gun and wouldn't sleep without it within my arm's reach. The next encounter is what I consider the most frightening of my entire life. For several weeks, nothing really happened. I don't get cable where I live, and one night I was watching something and my satellite kept acting up. I didn't like going outside at night, but because this is going to be quick, all I had to do is move the antenna. I did so. Nothing bad really happens for a good few weeks now, so I decided to go out to it. I grabbed my gun and flashlight and went out. The first thing I noticed was the eeriness around me. This time of year, the woods are active with all kinds of creatures, not tonight. Despite the fear I was developing, I made my way over to the satellite and began adjusting it. I then heard a small snap of a stick and quickly turned to my left and shined my light towards the direction of the noise. What I saw horrified me for the rest of my life. I was immediately met with blood-red eyes. They're the colour of blood and truly are evil. The head of the thing looks like a mutated German Shepherd. I don't know what to say. It looks like a werewolf. A long snout and ears. The fur's black and shaggy. I could see the creature's very muscular body. It looks massive. It's definitely not a bear or a mutation of one. It was half in and half out of the woods, almost crouching as it came up to my head at 6 foot. Fully standing, this thing must have been 8 foot. I was about 20 feet from this thing. I didn't even consider my gun. The chances in hindsight are that the little .223 would have just bounced off it or something while I got tore to shreds. I back away slowly, never breaking eye contact. Gently, I pick up my gun and my fight or flight kicks in. I chose flight. Maybe not the best option, but even if I stayed there, that thing would have killed me. I ran the fastest I've ever ran in my life and don't turn back once. I have no idea if that thing's pursuing me. I got back in the house, locked every door and window, covered the blinds and sat with my back against the wall, cradling the gun the entire night. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I didn't for the following days either. I don't live there anymore now. People often speak of Sasquatches being these weird natural creatures living with the ecosystem. Sure, if you see one it might be scary, but it's probably more in awe than anything. With this thing though, it's totally different. It felt unnatural, evil, sinister. It was stalking me, toying with me, and I believe it would have killed me. I have never seen nor experienced this feeling again in my life. It's a memory I'm trying to put past me, but I still get nightmares about it. I think about it until the day that I'm gonna die, and I'll never forget this. My dad told me about this incident that happened in the early 50s when he was a young child. It was in the early 50s. My dad couldn't have been much older than 5 or 6 years old when it happened. He grew up on a large farm that was very isolated. The nearest neighbour was actually at least 1/4 of a mile away through rolling wooded hills. There was no electricity or service on the farm back then. They didn't get phones until the summer of 1984, so they're effectively on their own. Now one day, Grandpa had sent my uncle up to the feed mill to collect payment for the year's harvest. He was told to get in cash. Grandpa wanted to pay that year's taxes and deposit the rest in the bank. My uncle brought home the money. Now on that particular night, at around 2 a.m, they're awakened by a car parked on the property with its headlights aimed at the house. My grandpa rolled out of bed and crawled along the floor to my uncle and dad's bedroom and woke up my uncle. In almost complete darkness, they ran down the stairs. My uncle ran out of the back door and grandpa out of the front. My grandpa threw the door open and ran outside so fast he pretty much leapt over the back steps to confront the guy. The driver of the car was almost out of the way of the house. He saw my grandpa come in and my uncle close behind. He turned and hauled out of there. He made it into his car and he was trying to drive away, and my grandpa was grabbing the steering wheel trying to stop him. He managed to break loose and my grandpa chased him a short distance down the road, but he finally got away. At that point, my grandpa and my uncle noticed a second car at the end of the block speeding away. The intruders managed to get away for the night. Thankfully, no one's hurt. The next day, my grandpa and uncle reported what happened to the sheriff, and they said if it happens again, do what you have to do to defend yourself. The next stop they made was to the hardware store to buy rifles, one for each of them. There was never a repeat of the incident, as my dad knows. That was an epilogue. That was at least 60 years ago. It was more than 30 years before I was born, and despite that, it's done more to form my views of self-resilience and home defense. More importantly than any Supreme Court cases stating the police have no duty to protect individuals. Now life has taught me that you often have to defend yourself, and the people who don't are usually the ones that end up not here. Okay, so this doesn't exactly keep me up at night, but was definitely something really terrifying when it happened. I got my first job in sophomore year of high school. My birthday is August 27, so I'm always either too young or too old. The importance of this story is, my mum and I don't get along. She is a person that picked me up before and after work. But one night, I was mad at her for something, so I walk home alone. I'm like a really small person, and I always look younger than I am, apparently. I'm 5'5", and get told all the time that I look like I'm still in high school, and this is me at 22. Anyway, at the time, I work at a grocery store which is like half a mile away from home. Creepy story. I walk home at 10 PM. I know the route obviously well. Everything was fine until I get to the neighbourhood. There's a swim school for little kids right by me. Literally, the only business in my neighbourhood. This is important because on my walking trip, I chose to cut through the parking lot. I noticed a guy was walking maybe 100 feet away from me. I wasn't worried at all, so I cut through the parking lot and head through the wooded trees. And then I keep walking. I then look back behind me, and I notice the guy is still there. My brain, I went into fight or flight mode. This is because I knew I'd cut a corner, so he shouldn't be there. His arms were moving swiftly, and clearly he was coming at me with intent. I book it to my house, and I can hear him chasing behind me. The guy was big, even from far away. He looked over 250 pounds. I luckily made it back home alright, but I hate to think what would have happened if I didn't know the area, and if he caught up to me.